Right. So it's already 2 p.m. So I think that I will begin the live session. So Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. And a very good afternoon to all. And I pray that all of you in the pink of your health and uh, that we all can do all the religious practices such as Tarawih, Puasa, and so on, right, in this fasting month. Thank you for coming and be with me and with your other colleagues for this Facebook Live organized by Proofreaders United and also been published online in Tulis Thesis Facebook page group. So before I begin my sharing session, so allow me to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Farid Mawan Hassan. So I am currently a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Sharia and Law, University Science Islam Malaysia. And also I'm a visiting professor at the Faculty of Law, School of Law, General Sudirman University, Central Java, Indonesia. So my area of specialization is in international criminal law, international humanitarian law, public international law, law of treaties, and so on. So I think that it's pretty much boring, hearing about law and something. So let's go to the main business for this live session. So particularly yesterday and until this afternoon, before 12 p.m., I received quite a number of questions from all of you who are interested to know more about the topic that I will be sharing or I will be discussing. So briefly, basically, this live session is about my personal journey during my PhD, right? So I have grouped the questions into four different groups. Number one, some of you have asked me about GOT or graduate on time, which is, basically not really into the topic that will be shared in today's session, but I'll try my best to briefly entertain this question. Second part of the questions which has been asked is about how did I, get no correction for my PhD. So I'll explain the not really the tips, but how did I, get into this kind of achievement during my PhD studies. And thirdly, about research gap, right? How do we find research gap? How do we identify research gaps and so on? And lastly, on how to prepare for Viva, right? So I'll go to all these questions accordingly. But before I go and discuss on all these four questions. So allow me to briefly introduce myself or my background, right? I graduated from my bachelor degree in Sharia and Law from University Science Islam Malaysia in 2011. So I received scholarship from the same university where I did my first degree. So the university offered me a fellowship scholarship to do both my master's and PhD altogether for 5 years. So the contract is 5 years scholarship. So I accepted the offer, and then I went to Ahmad Ibrahim Kuliah of Law, International Islamic University, Malaysia, IIUM, and I got my master's degree within 1 year. And then I applied for to do my PhD for quite a number of universities, right, abroad, because the one of the conditions of the fellowship or scholarship is that I have to choose either my master's or my PhD, and do any of these two abroad. So I chose to do my PhD abroad instead. So I applied to a number of universities and I received a number of offers, especially from the Copenhagen University in Denmark, and also a few other universities in the UK, especially University of Aberdeen. So just because of so many reasons, which I think that I have no time to explain to all of you now, but I opt for University of Aberdeen. So I went to Scotland in the UK on January 2014, and I underwent my PhD studies for 4 years. I submitted my thesis on January 2018, and my viva took place 3.5 months or 4 months after. So my viva was 4 months after I have submitted my PhD, and it was supposed to be 1.5 months or 2 months after I have submitted my PhD, my thesis. But just because of there was a weather condition in the UK at that time, so my viva needs to be postponed. So that is why it took 4 months for me to sit for my viva, right? So then my viva took almost 55 minutes or 50 minutes, right? So I started at 9:40, so I finished at 10:20 a.m. in the morning, right? So when I finished, when the viva finished, then as usual, the examiners asked me to wait outside the Viva room. Then I went outside the room, and less than 1 minute, they asked me to re-enter the Viva room once more for for the results. So the deliberation took them for less than 1 minute to discuss. So at that time, I felt very afraid, and because I have heard and seen some of my colleagues where the deliberation for the results took like 15 to 30 minutes sometimes. So mine was less than 1 minute. So I was thinking that I was about to fail at the time. So, but when I enter into the Viva room once more, or after my Viva session, so my internal examiner told me that he congratulated me, and told me that it is already an achievement to submit your thesis. So at that time, I felt that the words is not really nice to be heard. So I was thinking that I'm going to fail. Right. Then he passed to the external examiner, and the external examiner gave a few important remarks where, my external examiner, he is a world-renowned professor in the field or in the area of international criminal law at the time, or even until today. So he told me that he is very strict when examining PhD thesis, especially. So and he has examined hundreds of PhD theses at that time or before that. So and as such, he told me that he couldn't find any fault in both the language and also, most importantly, the substance, right, in the thesis. And as such, they congratulate me, and I passed my PhD without correction. So at that time, I did not hear the word that he told me that I passed my PhD without any correction. So I was wondering and listening very carefully to the results. So I was focusing on how many months will I be given to do my correction. So I paused, and I was wondering that for a few seconds. So when both of my examiners look at me, and they saw that I have no reaction at that time, so the external examiner told me that, oh, you should be happy you passed with no correction. So when he told me that, so I realized that, oh, really, am I? So at that time, so all the burdens or all these big rocks on my head and on my shoulders at that time has been removed. Then I told both of the examiners, that can I hug you both, right? So then I literally hugged them after the viva session. So that was my briefly about myself, right? So after that, I went back to Malaysia, and I've been offered the position as senior lecturer at the Faculty of Sharia and Law, USIP, and currently I am serving for more than 2.5 years already. So now, uh, first of all, I would like to thank to Proofreaders United for inviting me for the second time, because previously I had the first session also with Proofreaders United and live Facebook on Tulis Thesis group, right? For the first time for the past few months, if I'm not mistaken. So at that time, so I shared my personal journey on my PhD studies. So if you would like to know, or I mean to watch this video, so I think that you could Google in YouTube, just type Dr. Farid, Viva, or I mean pass with no correction, something, and you will be able to find the video, right, in YouTube, and you may watch that live session in YouTube. Now, coming back to the business, that the questions that have been posed to me uh, yesterday and until this afternoon. Number one, some of you have asked me how to get or how to graduate on time, so how to finish my PhD or my master's on time, right? Regardless whether you are doing your master's or PhD. Now, I have seen this, and many people have asked me the same questions before. Now, uh, uh, graduate on time is basically a good achievement, but that is only for me. It is only your personal achievement, nothing more and nothing less, right? If you graduate on time, then sometimes some of your colleagues or the people out there will congratulate you. They will send flowers, cards, congratulations cards, right? Congratulating you for graduating on time. Nothing more, nothing less. But what the bigger question is that what will be the contribution, your contribution after your PhD journey, or after you have finished your PhD, or after you have finished your masters, right? Will you be able to contribute to the society? Will you be able to share all the knowledge that you have acquired during your PhD or your master's studies, right? That is the question that you need to seriously ask yourself. All right, regardless whether you graduate on time or you finish your PhD 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? As long as you finish your master's degree, you finish your PhD, as long as you have finished whatever that you have started, i.e. your postgraduate studies, right? That is what most important thing, right? To graduate on time, or not to graduate on time. So sometimes you will see that people are struggling even within their 4, 5, 6 years of their PhD journey, right? But the most important thing is that you know we finish what we have started. So when we start the postgraduate journey, master's degree, master's and PhD. So like it or not, we have to finish, right, what we have started. So the end of the tunnel is always there, but how do you get to the tunnel? That is the question. Right. Sometimes your journey will be smooth sailing, right? So some of you will face many difficulties, right? So for example, if you conduct interviews, so no one will be interested or are interested to be part of your studies. So they people did not respond to your questions or your queries. All right, so to your questionnaire and so on. So they have no time to be interviewed, right? So all these are the hurdles, right? We did our postgraduate journey, regardless whether it is masters or PhD, right? But sometimes people have no such problem, right, within their PhD. So, but all in all, what makes you a better person is after you get your PhD or you get your master's degree, right? So the life after, right? whether you could use whatever that you have gained, right, during your PhD journey, your master's journey, the knowledge that you have acquired, and to be shared with all the people surrounding, right, with the community, right, or to contribute to the knowledge or to the area of knowledge that you have been studying for the past few years. So that is the most important thing, right? The second part is about the no correction thing, right? How did I do it? How did I plan to get no correction? So to be honest with all of you, never in my life I have this kind of aim, right? That I have to do this, I have to do that in order for me to finish with my PhD and get a no correction result. So never in my life I imagined such. Now, what most important thing to me when I did my PhD was as long as I get my PhD, that's all. Regardless whether it is a minor correction or even if it is major correction, as long as I get what I wanted, right, at the beginning, right, my PhD. So, no, the journey, if you ask me about the journey itself, so I also, have many problems or many hurdles, right? Whenever, during my PhD studies at the time, right? So if you want to know what are those hurdles and whatnot, then you may watch the YouTube video that I have mentioned to you earlier on the first session that I've shared with all of you, right? But the no correction tips, right? I tell you that what I did was I just do it. Whatever my supervisors told me or advised me to do, I just follow them. Sometimes you will feel that when you had a meeting, or for example myself, I had a meeting with my supervisor this week, for example. So both of my supervisors told me that I have to do A. I did, right? But after a few weeks, for another meeting, when we had another meeting, they told me to do B. So I told them, few weeks back, you told me to do A. So I did that. But now you told me to do B, right? So, I asked them the same questions, right? So which is which? Is it A or B, right? But, my supervisors told me that, the as long as or until and unless I have put all together the whole chapters, all chapters of my thesis, to combine all of them together, then, they and I myself will see the bigger picture of the thesis, right? Because chapters will keep changing, right? Number one, because you do not get the whole chapters together. That's number one. Number two, uh, the literatures and also the area of studies keep changing. For example, I myself, so I'm reading law, right? So sometimes when the court delivered a new judgment, then new perspective must be discussed. So I have to change whatever that I have written so far, right? So all these, as long as or until and unless you have combined all together and submit, then things will keep changing. That is the uh, uh, um, uh, problem, not real problem, but the challenge, right? Or one of the challenges, right, where postgraduates are facing, right? The method is changing, right? For example, if you are doing, well, if you are studying on a specific method now, then next week or next 2 weeks or next month or few months after, then new methods or the same methods have already been delivered or been explained or been introduced. Then you have to change, right? So all these, these are all the challenges, right? Where all postgraduate students like me before and like you now, right? If you're still fighting, struggling to finish your master's and PhD as well. So this is what we learn during our PhD journey, right? So to keep changing things, right? Especially the chapters and the contents of the chapters. So that is normal, right? Now coming back to the main questions now about research gap. right? So I have received, many different wordings about research gaps, right? But all in all, about research gap. So all of you are interested to, I mean, many of you are interested to ask, how do we identify research gap? So how do we know whether, what you are doing is, to fill the gap in the knowledge? Now, number one is how to identify research gap. So in order to identify research gap, or to know whether there is or there are research gap or gaps, right, in the knowledge, right, that, or in the area that you are studying, you have to read. Now, finding research gap or knowledge is like a 1,000 pieces of jigsaw puzzle, right? So all of us, we have played, we have been playing jigsaw puzzles, right? So kita beli dekat supermarket, so we go and buy jigsaw puzzle, right, during our, previous years. So these 1,000 jigsaw puzzles, right? I just give you this analogy or this example so that all of you, or including myself, could, could have this kind of picture, right, about research gap. So that 1,000 pieces of jigsaw puzzles, all right? So we will have the border, all right, the frame, the border, the keliling there, right? So when we start to play jigsaw puzzles, we will start normally with the frames, right? So these frames have already been delivered or have already been framed and been done by the previous studies, right? By the previous researchers, by the previous authors, right? From books, journal articles, and so on. So these are the basics, the foundation of the whole picture of the jigsaw puzzle, this 1,000 jigsaw puzzle. So now, from the hundreds of pieces left, right, to be filled and to create a beautiful picture of from the jigsaw puzzle, so you have to find the one or any of those pieces to be connected to whatever frame, or to whatever pieces of jigsaw puzzle which have been put in order to create the frame of the jigsaw puzzle, right? That is your research gap, right? Sometimes you will find a piece of, or a few pieces of jigsaw puzzle, but it is in the middle of nowhere of that whole jigsaw puzzle, right? So if you find that, then how do you going to, or how you are going to know whether it will connect somewhere and somehow to whatever that already been framed, right? So doing masters by research or PhD is basically to extend to whatever existing knowledge that we have now, presently, the status quo, right? Let's say that the status quo for that area of studies is this, right? Is about A. So how do we expand more about A, so that, what you have expanded is basically has a connection with the existing area of knowledge, or with the existing knowledge. So the same goes to the puzzle just now, right? So you have to find the pieces, right? The remaining pieces out there, where any of those pieces could have been connected to any part of the frame, right? To the border of the jigsaw puzzles, right? It cannot be in the middle of somewhere, because if you do that, then how you're going to connect with those borders, with those frames, or the framework that already been set up by the previous players, right? By the previous researchers, right? From their existing books or journal articles, right? So if you have that in mind, then you will keep searching and searching and searching until you find the connecting dot, right? For example, when we play 1,000 pieces of jigsaw puzzle, let's say we find an oceanic scenery, or forests, scenery, and so on. So many of those pieces of jigsaw puzzle, looks the same or look the same, right? But how do we differentiate those pieces, right? In order to connect that particular pieces into the frame, the existing frame or border of the jigsaw puzzle that has already been done, or been defined by the previous player or by the previous scholars, right, from their respective books and journal articles, right? So we have to keep digging and digging and digging, right? So by digging those pieces of jigsaw puzzle, it is like we are doing the research, we are doing the reading, right? The more we dig, the more we'll see the bigger picture. Oh, this one is not related to any of the existing border, and perhaps that it will be in the middle of the jigsaw puzzle. So put it aside, right? So the same goes to how do we find the research gap. So we have to start to read and read and read until and unless we know that whatever that we have been doing or whatever that we have been reading is basically an extension to whatever, or would be an extension to whatever the border or the frame or the line that the status quo of the knowledge of the studies. Now, the tips, right? How did I conduct my literature review and so now when we find these literatures from books and especially from journal articles, right? So when you download one journal articles, right? So what I did was I will not read that article first. I will start downloading, right? Downloading all the relevant articles or all relevant journal articles, right? Specifically on the area that I would like to study on, right? Or to study about. When I did that, right, and then I will start to read, and identify the keyword or the key points that that particular author has discussed in his or her paper, right? So when I have read quite a number of journal articles, for example, that I will put them into a group or different groups. For example, journal A, B, C they talk about the same point, right? So let's say they talk about fried rice, for example, right? Fried rice. So these three talk about fried rice, right? So and then I will find another journal article that say D, E, F. So or these authors talk about fried rice, but different types of fried rice, right? And I'll categorize them according to their category, right? So when I write my literature review or when I identify the research gap, then I start to question, right? These are all the similarities that I have seen. Now I have to look the differences between all these existing literatures. When I do the readings, right? So then I will start to write some notes, right? Though from the same page, from the same article, in the same article, or I write down on the on a plain paper. I will highlight the differences between all these literatures, right? So just now we have seen the similarities. Now we go one by one on their differences. So what makes literature A differs from literature B? On what point, on what sense? Then I will list down. So these are the thing that the author in article A has discussed, but not been discussed in paper B. And what paper B or author B has discussed in paper B has not been discussed with paper A or paper C, right? So when I did that, I will see the similarities and differences. So from there, I know that regardless whether it is the similarities or differences, all these have been discussed by all these authors. So I will have to question myself. So if these are the things that already been discussed by the existing authors or by the existing literatures, then what would make my thesis, my research differ from them? So from there, when you have identified whatever been been discussed by these authors, regardless on their similarities or their differences, then I have to do something, outside or beyond whatever that already been discussed by all these authors. So when you have identified all these, then your research gap or your contribution will be much more clearer, right? So if you do not have a clear contribution, especially during your Viva, because the examiner will ask you, so what's new? What is your contribution? So if you cannot or if you cannot identify, your contribution, right? The newness of your research as compared to whatever already exists, right? Which is differ or which are differ from the existing literatures or the existing knowledge, then you will be in big trouble at that time, because you yourself you do not know, right? So like it or not, start from the reading, right? So the research gap will start from digging the existing or the existing literatures, right? So I repeat myself again. So I will read, identify and group all these literatures according to their similarities first. So from the similarities, right? Let's say A, B, C talk about a similar point. Point point number one, for example. C, D, E, F, these three are journals or articles or literatures. They talk about the same thing, about number two, point number two, right? And then G, E, F, G, or whatever, right? And then they talk about the same thing. Now you know the similarities, right? So if these are all similarities, then you cannot repeat or you cannot do the same thing in your research, because there's nothing new. Because they already mentioned that not only one but a number of uh, uh, authors have discussed the same point, so there's nothing new on that. Then start to identify the differences between all these authors. What makes points what makes other points written by author A differ from what has been discussed by author B, right? Highlight those differences, right? And then B and C and compare with A and B, right? From the same group. And then from the same group, and then from the same group. So from there, you will see these are have already been discussed by all these authors, right? So from there, you start to think which part that I will discuss in my thesis, because I cannot touch on the same point, because those similarities and differences which have been discussed by all these authors have been discussed already, right? Regardless of their similarities or differences. So I have to do something new or to extend, right, the discussion, right? So from what they have discussed, right? So if I can do that, then I will, I could, defend my thesis during my Viva session with the examiner, right? Because sometimes we do not know whether the examiners will be, good examiners, or sometimes they will be nasty, right, during the Viva session. So during my time, the external examiner was very nasty, right? uh, they asked me about something which is beyond my thesis, which I will be explaining in a few seconds, right? When I turn to the last part of my sharing session on how to prepare for Viva Voce, right? So about research gap just now, right? So when we have identified, or you have identified the gap, right? Things that have not been discussed, right, by these authors, then that is your contribution, right? That part will be discussed in your thesis, because one of the questions during the Viva, right, definitely the examiners will ask you what's new. So what makes your thesis, or what makes your thesis, especially whatever that you have written in your thesis, differ from the existing literatures? If you cannot answer that, right, on the point that let's say that during my Viva, I told my examiner that previously there are numerous literatures. We cannot deny that, right? Many literatures available, right? So on point one, two, three, four, five. But all these authors or existing authors, right, or existing scholars, they do not touch or discuss on this particular point, which I come up with my thesis, because from that perspective, then that will be my contribution to knowledge. I extend whatever that have been discussed. If it is not because of them, if it is not because of they did not discuss in their literatures, then I couldn't contribute my part, right, in my thesis on that perspective, right? So you have to know how to deal with the nasty questions from nasty examiners, right? So sometimes if you will be so lucky to have examiners who are very soft spoken and very helpful and so on, but some of you will not be that lucky, because some examiners, they tend to provoke you during the viva voce or oral examination, right? By provoking you, or by making faces and so on, or by making remarks, so that you could lose your confidence, or you could lose your poise, right? Or your confidence at that time. Then you tend to lose all the information, so whatever that you have, right? Beforehand. Now, coming back to the last bit of the question, right, on preparing for Viva Voce. How long did I take to prepare for my Viva? And how long does it take for us? Like, let's say that, you are about to submit your thesis, or you have submitted your thesis, waiting for your Viva. So when should I start to prepare for my Viva, right? So based on my own experience, that that, after you have finished after you have submitted your thesis, you will be sitting for your oral examination. You will be examined orally by the examiners, right? Regardless of how many months or how many weeks after you have submitted your thesis, right? So the day will come, right? Next week, next month, next 2 months, right? Next few months, and so on. So that day will come, right? That day will pass as well. So the minute you have submitted your thesis, start to prepare for oral examination, or start to prepare for your viva voce, right? Sometimes you feel that we already it is exhausting, right? To prepare for the thesis, right? To do all the polishing, to proofread the thesis, right? To beautify the thesis before we submit. So it drains all our energy. That's true, right? So I want to take, let's say that when I submit, let's say that I am about to submit my thesis next month, for example. Then I have this in mind, that when I finish and submit my thesis, then I want to take a break. I want to go for holiday for a week or for 2 weeks, right? And then I'll come back. Now, the momentum will keep losing if you do if you keep putting your thesis away from you, right? So my advice is that, so whenever you have submitted your thesis, do not lose this momentum, right? Because you need to have this momentum, especially the knowledge. Let's say that that your viva will take like 6 months after, or 8 months after. Then you think that I have more time to prepare. Then you want to put it aside, your thesis aside, and do something else, right? But the more you do that, the more the knowledge that you have gained during the process will keep losing, right? uh, or the skills, right, will keep draining, right, as well. So what I did was, when I submitted my thesis, right, I started to just browse my thesis, right, slowly, because I don't want to lose my momentum, right, from what I have gained for the past few years, right, during my journey. So what I did was, I just make my thesis as my bedtime story reading, right? So let's say that for tonight I just read a few pages of my thesis, right? So when I did that, right, then I know whatever words that I have used inside that particular chapter, inside that particular page of my thesis, right? And it turns out that during my viva, uh, my external examiner asked me to open up different pages of my thesis, and they asked me, especially the external examiner, he asked me, what do you mean by this word, right? Could you please explain, what do you mean by this word, only specifically on that particular word, right? Let's say that I use some kind of very strong word, right? Then I need to explain, right? If you do not well prepared, or if do not read, then you suddenly get shocked, right? That, oh really, did I write it? Did I put that word inside my thesis, right? You'll get shocked, right? Because You have written almost 100,000 words of your thesis, right, for PhD, right, and few thousands of words for your master thesis, right? So you tend to forget, right, what kind of words that have been used inside your thesis, right? So by doing this, kind of bad story time and so on, you keep on reading whatever you have written in your thesis, so you keep yourself on track, right? So, oh, I basically, I have written. Then you will realize, oh, I think that this word is not suitable, or this is such a strong word. I'll be in trouble. So then try to think that, perhaps that I will be asked during my Viva, about this word or about this sentence, for example. Then prepare yourself beforehand. What would be your answer, right, if you ever been asked during your Viva Voce or during your oral examination? What will be your answer, right? Because if you do not prepare beforehand, then it is like you have been ambushed. Then if you've been ambushed, then you cannot prepare yourself, right? You cannot defend yourself, right? So then, though you're confident at that day, but whenever you've been ambushed, right, that you've been asked somewhere, even it is within your thesis, but you forgot that that it's there, right? So you will lose your confidence, right, accordingly, right? So prepare yourself, right? So then try to practice, right? What would be the answer, right? So that you could address the questions very calmly, right, whenever you've been asked during your viva session, right? Then whatever footnotes, for example, or references that you have cited in your thesis, you also have to know, right? Sometimes when we have read the literatures, right, from our literature reviews and so on, then we tend to forget because there are so many literatures that we have read, right? Plus our own data and so on. So all this, when they are all mixed together, that we tend to forget something in somewhere, and then we tend to remember the other parts, right? So from there, when we do or when we read the thesis, right, at least 1 or 2 pages a day, right? Because let's say that you have a few months to go before your Viva session, then just read 1 or 2 pages or 5 pages a day, right? So that you keep yourself on track. So whenever you come across the references, for example, your literatures that you have cited in your thesis, try to go back on whatever notes that you have made whenever you are reading that particular literature, right? Previously, so go back and refresh your minds. Oh, this literature talks about this, right? So then you will refresh your minds, right? Because sometimes during your viva, the examiner will ask you, could you please explain to us what did the author in this particular literature has said, right? So they want to know whether you really, read the journal or the book or that particular literature, right? So they just want to test your ability whether you really read that literature or not, or you just simply cite, you just take it somewhere and then put it in your literature or put it in your thesis, right? So then you will be able to answer if you keep yourself updated and refreshed, right? Throughout the waiting time before the real day or before the day of the oral examination. If you don't do that, then you tend to whenever you've been asked with such question, then you will feel like, oh my god, I have been ambushed once more. Just now you have been ambushed for another question, but now and then now you've been ambushed and you've been asked with another questions which you never expect, right? That's point number two. Now point number three is that whenever during viva voce session, the examiner will tend to ask you questions, something which is beyond your thesis, right? Like my own experience before, my thesis is about whether the laws in Southeast Asian countries, uh, 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 can could receive international law, can implement international law or certain treaty that I am discussing in my uh, uh, PhD at that time, right? So when the examiner asked me about Venezuela, what is happening about happening in Venezuela, what is happening in Colombia, in African countries, right? Anywhere in the whole world. So at that time, I thought that the examiners were trying to bring me or to ask me questions or to test my ability whether I could bring back them back to the discussion, right? So when I did that, let's say that I bring them back to the main discussion or to the main issue or to the main topic that we are discussing about my thesis, let's say about Southeast Asian countries. They told me that we have read your thesis. We know inside out of your thesis, right? So we have read your thesis quite a number of times. So we know about your thesis. Now we want to know your perspective on this part of the world, whether whatever that you have or you have contributed in your thesis will be implemented or can be implemented the same at this part of the world, right? So they want to know our perspective. So they want to test our ability to apply or implement the knowledge that we have contributed or we have done the research for the thesis, and whether that part of contribution can be implemented on more or less the same situation. So then I have to answer those questions, like it or not, right? So they want to see whether we really have this philosophical thinking, or whether that we have this bigger perspective, bigger picture, to solve the problem. Let's say from our own studies. Let's say that we can use the same thing in order to settle or to implement those ideas or opinions or knowledge at the in other part of the world, right? So this is kind of a test, right? During our Viva Voce. So we must expect the unexpected. So during the Viva Voce session, not only you have to know, or we have to know what have been written in our thesis inside and out, but we must expect that we must know everything under the sun, the current situation or the current issues that could be of interest to the examiner, so that perhaps that they have read somewhere, or let's say that our Viva session is at 2 p.m., for example. In the morning, they have read the newspaper, right? They have seen online and so on, all right, on their way to the Viva session. So when they read all these information, so they think that this could be one of the questions that I would like to ask the candidate during Viva session. So I want to test him or her on his or her ability, whether he could really or she could really understand and implement and apply the knowledge that he or she has acquired for the past few years during his or her journey, right, for masters or PhD, regardless, right? So all this must be, bear in mind, right? Must be borne in mind by all of us, right? The researchers, because if we just stick to the thesis without adding more information about current issues, especially the issue that has been currently been debated or been discussed, right, by a certain community or a certain group of people, or the whole community, or the whole community in the whole world, right? So whenever you have submitted your thesis, let's say that you have submitted your thesis on January. Let's say your Viva will be on June or May. So you have 5 to 6 months to prepare. So throughout these months, you have to keep yourself updated with the current issues, with the changes of the knowledge, or perhaps there are some changes. All right, new methods have been developed. Right, new perspective have been acquired by different authors, for example, or more or less the same ideas have been produced in new literatures, right, by other literatures, right, which are more or less the same with whatever you have written in your thesis. So perhaps that you could prepare yourself, or you can prepare yourself, because that will be one of the questions as well during the Viva session, because the examiner will ask you, have you come across, I mean, have you read this article written by this fellow last week? Because there is a new journal on that, right? A new, I have read that particular journal. It is more or less the same with yours, right? So then, you know, how do we know whether yours is, differ or different from that particular journal articles that has been written by this particular author, right? So if you do not keep yourself on track with the current development, then you will not be able to answer all these questions during the Viva session, right? So sometimes people tend to think that once I have submitted my thesis, then anything happen after that, that will be none of my business anymore, because the duration of the studies, or the limitations, all right, that we have included and mentioned in the thesis will be from this date until this date, right? That is, we clearly mentioned in our thesis, but they want to know something beyond that, right? Sometimes they want to ask you something extraordinary, because they know that you have mentioned in your thesis about the limitation, that your studies will take from will be based on this date until this date, right? But things happen after that date, so perhaps that they want to know what will be your answer, what will be your perspective, right? If your thesis has been extended, the date of the studies of your thesis, to be extended to a certain period in after that, right? So what will be your answer? Whether your perspective will still be the same, or your answer will be different, right? Because of that particular changes, or because of that particular development, right? So all this must come, must be taken into consideration whenever we prepare for viva voce or oral examination, right? Your thesis, and also latest development after you have submitted your thesis, right? So because many questions can be triggered, right, by the examiners, right? Not only from their own reading from your thesis, but from their own reading, right? From the current issues, current development, and so on. Because those examiners, they are experts within the area of studies. So they also keep themselves updated, right? By reading, right? By following some Twitter, some Facebook, some online sources, news portals, and so on. So because of that, they have all this in mind, right? So that it will trigger the many questions whenever they see something, or they read something online, for example, right? So I believe that that's all from me, from whatever that been asked. So I'll try my best to look at the questions posted on Facebook live here, if there's a new, or there are new questions. I'm currently waiting for the Viva Voce date. May Allah ease everything. Amen. Right? Now, there are some questions also given or submitted to me yesterday about um, the date of the Viva Voce, and also things that need to be prepared, right? What I did during my time was I have my a copy of my thesis, right? That's that is a must. Number two is that I will write down uh, uh, the main points. Right? What are the main points? Number one, I will write down what are the questions, right, to be asked in the thesis. The main question, and then the subsequent questions, right? Normally we have three questions: the main question, and then the following questions, following the main questions. That's number one. And number two, the answers, right? What will be the answer for the main question, whether it is in the affirmative or whether it is in the negative, right? So if your answer is in the affirmative, then the subsequent questions will follow. But what if the questions is in the negative, right? Whether the subsequent questions need to be answered as well, right? So they must be answered, or they must be discussed, right? Perhaps that whenever we discuss with the examiners during the viva voce or oral examination, when we say that the first question has been answered in the affirmative, for example, then to them they think that it should be in the negative, so they want to have a discussion, right? Why do you answer that question in the affirmative way, but to their mind, it should be the other way around, right? So then you need to explain and defend your answer, right? Why did you come up with such an answer, right? In the affirmative way, for example, that you have to explain the reason behind the affirmative answers. So these are the reasons: number one, number two, number three, number four. So these answers or these points or these reasons have been addressed in this part of my thesis, chapter one or chapter two or chapter three or chapter four. So all this, must be within your fingertips. You have to know the key points or the points that you have raised in your thesis, right? You need to know and you have to know where did you answer or where did you mention all these points inside your thesis. Let's say that when they ask you or when they reason with you, right? Why did you answer this or why did you say this, right? Or what do you think about this, for example? Then you may say to them or you may answer to the examiners that, to address your concern or to address your question that, it's supposed to be this or my answer will be this, right? And these points I already explained in details in my thesis in this page and paragraph this or in this chapter, right? If I may bring your attention to that particular chapter. So then when they flip the your thesis, right? So, show them which part of the page or which part of the thesis or which part of the chapter that you have identified or you have given the answer, right, to the question, right? So by doing this, it shows your confidence that you really, did and you really, wrote the thesis, right? So it shows that you really know your thesis inside and out, right? So if you cannot, pinpoint where did you write or where did you put the answer, right? So basically sometimes you know that you have the answer and it's there in the thesis, right? But you do not know which part of the thesis, right? Because there are many pages of your thesis. Let's say that the examiner sometimes they will ask you, have you, which part of, could you show us which part of the thesis that you have mentioned on this point, or based on your answer just now? So if you cannot show them, then, they will be wondering whether it is you yourself who have written the thesis. Perhaps you have, someone else who have been doing the work, not you, right? So this is one of the abilities, right, to test or to be tested, right, during the Viva Voce session, right? So okay, I believe that that's all from me now, right? And I would like to say thank you to all of you for spending your weekend with me and listening to my sharing session. So if you have any queries, so perhaps that you may send your email or send some of the questions, or you may private message to myself, and then I'll try my best to answer and also to respond to those questions, because I'm afraid that, whatever that I have shared with you, for the past for the past 1 hour, have not been properly addressed. So perhaps I miss the points here and there or somewhere, right, in my explanation. So I apologize for that. And if you need more information, or if you need more explanation, so you may text or you may email to the organizer, and then the organizer will inform me, or you may direct ask me, right, to my Facebook, and then, I will try my best to address this concern, right? So with that, I thank you so much for having with us today, and then selamat berbuka, and enjoy your breaking your fast, right, during Maghrib, right? So thank you so much, and I'll see you guys again in the future. So should we have the next live session together, right? Thank you so much.